Have you ever noticed how incredibly uncomfortable it gets in a room the very second someone suggests that a person's actions are, well, just entirely their own?
Oh, absolutely. It's like the temperature in the room just instantly drops.
Right. It is this immediate, palpable shift because we reflexively just want to jump in and talk about context.
Yeah, the history, the circumstances.
Exactly, like the whole complex web of things that drove them to that specific behavior. Because simply pointing and saying, you did this, it just feels exceptionally harsh, doesn't it?
It does. It feels almost like an accusation.
Yeah, like we're violently erasing everything that happened to them leading up to that exact moment.
It often registers as a profound lack of empathy. I mean, we live in a culture that has developed this highly tuned sensitivity to the root causes of behavior.
Which is a good thing, generally speaking.
Oh, for sure. We map out the socioeconomic factors, the psychological traumas, the systemic pressures, and when you have all that rich analytical data right at your fingertips,
Yeah.
looking solely at the individual action itself,
Hmm.
it can feel, I don't know, incredibly reductive.
Reductive, yeah. Which is exactly why today's deep dive is going to, I think, really challenge some of our most deeply held conversational habits.
It definitely challenged mine.
Right. So we are diving into a really fascinating stack of material today. It's a collection of recent sociological research papers on behavioral psychology, and we're pairing that with a deeply provocative central philosophical essay that just completely deconstructs the hidden architecture of personal responsibility.
It's a wild read.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore why our constant dodging of personal ownership, even when we do it for, perfectly understandable, compassionate reasons, is actually a functional trap.
A huge trap.
Yeah. We are going to look at how owning our actions isn't about taking the blame or like performing some kind of public self-flagellation. It is about unlocking what the core essay calls the ultimate engine of actual change.
And I think we should probably establish the ground rules for this exploration right up front.
Oh, definitely. Because people get defensive really fast with this stuff.
Right, and the text makes a very careful distinction here. The material we're looking at today is completely divorced from finger-wagging.
Yes.
It is not some moralistic conservative lecture about how everyone needs to just pull themselves up by their bootstraps and do better.
Because that's usually where my brain goes when I hear personal responsibility.
Exactly. We all kind of flinch at that phrase. But instead, this essay is proposing a radical structural shift in how we view our own agency. It's analyzing the pure mechanics of transformation rather than the heavy morality of blame.
Okay, let's unpack this because the source starts by examining that visceral discomfort we just talked about. When ownership is brought up, it just feels like blame.
And humans naturally avoid pain.
Right. So we reflexively perform what the author calls the pivot.
The pivot. I love that term.
It's so accurate. We immediately pivot the conversation away from the individual and redirect it towards systems, right? Toward early childhood conditioning, toward what was done to a person rather than what was done by them.
And the crucial nuance the text introduces here is that this pivot isn't factually incorrect.
Wait, so the author isn't saying the context is made up?
Not at all. Context is absolutely real. History is real. Systemic pressures and biological predispositions, they carry immense weight. The author isn't disputing the validity of those forces for a single second.
Right.
The argument is that in the frantic rush to make that pivot to explain away the behavior, we quietly and entirely abandon our leverage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We forfeit the only actual mechanism we have to change our circumstances.
Because if we treat actions purely as things that happen to someone like, a sudden thunderstorm or an earthquake rather than something generated by someone, we leave the levers of transformation completely untouched.
You can't change the weather.
Exactly. I like to think of this in terms of like a leaking pipe in a house.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. So the pivot is basically the equivalent of sitting in your flooded living room, surrounded by all your ruined furniture, and passionately analyzing the history of the house's plumbing.
Just sitting in the water.
Yes, sitting in a foot of water. You're researching the systemic failures of the municipal water supply. You're discussing the shoddy materials used by contractors in the 1980s. You're writing a full-on thesis on the corrosive properties of hard water.
All of which, again, might be thoroughly documented and factually indisputable.
Sure.
You might have the most accurate structural critique of the plumbing in the entire neighborhood.
But instead of just reaching for the wrench to tighten the valve and stop the water right now, you are merely analyzing the cause.
Right.
The pipe just continues to spray water all over your life while you are busy being right about why it's leaking. You are sitting in a flooded room feeling intellectually and morally vindicated while your furniture literally rots.
And what's fascinating here is how the author frames this as a purely functional problem. It's not about deciding who is bad or, who legally deserves to pay for the water damage.
It's just physics at that point.
Exactly. It's a question of physical mechanics. Who is actually holding the wrench? Who is standing in the physical position to reach the valve?
Right.
If you insist that the shoddy contractor from 1985 is the sole author of the plumbing disaster, you are functionally stating that only the contractor from 1985 can fix the leak in your living room today.
Which is insane when you put it like that.
Yeah. You are handing your present agency over to a ghost, which is, practically speaking, a disaster for your immediate survival.
It is a recipe for absolute paralysis. But if grabbing that wrench is so obviously the logical move, it begs a massive psychological question.
How about we just grab it?
Right. Why is our biological instinct to drop the wrench and run? Why do we fight ownership so hard?
Well, the text moves from this symptom of resistance to its psychological root, and I found this part to be incredibly validating.
Yeah, it takes the shame right out of it.
It really does. It turns out this resistance isn't because we're lazy or weak or, just wanting to complain.
Far from it, right.
Exactly. The resistance to owning our actions is often a highly sophisticated evolutionary adaptation. It is a deeply ingrained survival mechanism.
Okay, walk me through that.
So, if we look at the psychological concept of learned helplessness, we see this really clearly. Think about someone in a position of genuine material powerlessness.
Like a kid in a bad situation.
Yeah, a child in an unpredictable, abusive home, or a person trapped in a coercive system where they have zero social recourse. In those environments, diffusing blame outward isn't just a psychological trick. It is highly adaptive.
I struggle with this a bit, though, and I know you listening might be having this exact same reaction right now.
It's a tough concept to swallow.
It is, because if you tell someone from a marginalized community who is facing genuine, documented systemic bias that they just need to, quote, own their actions, that sounds dangerously close to victim blaming. How does the source reconcile the reality of real victimization with this demand for ownership?
That tension is the central tightrope of the entire text, and it demands a very careful reading.
Right.
The text explicitly validates that those wounds are real, the systemic bias is real, the powerlessness was not a hallucination.
It actually happened.
It happened. Furthermore, it is not a moral failing to have developed this externalizing defense mechanism. If you are a child and you internalize the chaos of the adults around you as your own personal failure, the psychological weight will literally crush you.
Yeah, a kid can't carry that.
They can't. So locating the cause outside of yourself, telling yourself, this is happening to me, I'm not the author of this, is what makes the unbearable navigable. It allows the psyche to survive intact.
So the mechanism itself is actually brilliant. It kept you alive.
It did. The tragedy only emerges with the passage of time. The danger lies in what happens when this brilliantly adaptive survival tool persists long after the conditions that generated it have vanished.
Right. So the child grows up. Or the coercive system shifts.
Yeah.
Or you finally manage to move out of the toxic environment.
Finally get out of the flooded house.
Exactly. But you're still acting like you're in it.
Right. The original threat is entirely gone, but the orientation remains. The deep-seated neurological belief that this is being done to me, not by me, calcifies into your default perceptual habit.
Which is terrifying, because then you begin viewing every interaction, every conflict, every minor inconvenience through that specific lens.
Yes, and from inside that architectural frame, every single problem you encounter looks like undeniable evidence of external forces acting upon you.
You're just constantly under attack.
The self becomes, as the author beautifully puts it, merely a surface that things land on.
Oh, wow.
You completely lose the sense of being an active agent, moving through a world that you are continuously shaping.
A surface that things land on. That is a hauntingly passive image.
It is.
You're just a target dummy waiting for the next projectile to hit you. But here's where it gets really interesting.
The turning point.
Yeah. Once we understand why we drop our agency to survive a genuinely threatening environment, we can start looking at the mechanics of what happens when we finally decide to pick it back up.
Right.
So how does the text actually define ownership here if it's not just taking the blame for everything?
Well, it requires a very precise understanding of what we mean by the word action. Taking ownership doesn't mean pretending your behaviors just materialized out of thin air in a vacuum.
Right, we're not blank slates.
Exactly. Every single action we take is generated from a vast field of prior experience, past wounds, and unconscious survival strategies. The text acknowledges all of that.
Okay.
But ownership simply asserts an unavoidable biological reality. You are the one who physically acted.
Not my trauma.
No, not your childhood history, not your socioeconomic environment, not the person who betrayed you 10 years ago. You.
And the quiet, almost invisible power of recognizing that biological reality is profound. Because if you acted, you possess the latent capacity to act differently.
That's the key right there.
Right. If the action belongs to you, the ability to alter it also belongs to you.
And this raises an important question about the dominant ways we currently try to solve problems, both on a personal level and, a societal one.
Yeah, how we're doing it all wrong.
Pretty much. Without this localized sense of personal ownership, we get trapped in what the sociological research calls an analytical loop, or hyper-analytical paralysis.
Oh, I know this loop very well.
We all do. We expend astronomical amounts of cognitive energy figuring out who caused what, who was responsible for whom, and tracing the exact lineage of who threw the first stone.
And that analytical loop is incredibly seductive because it feels exactly like work.
It feels productive.
Yes, we trick ourselves into thinking that mapping out the exact coordinates of our trauma is the same thing as healing it.
Oh, man.
That's so true.
We all know people, or let's be honest, we've been those people who can perfectly articulate why their life is a total mess.
They have a PhD in their own dysfunction. Exactly. They can cite their attachment style, the macroeconomic conditions of their industry, the narcissistic tendencies of their ex, and yet absolutely nothing changes in their daily reality.
Right, because the text points out that this analytical loop is fantastic at categorizing things, but categorization generates zero exit strategies.
None.
It simply breeds more complex analysis of how everyone arrived at this miserable destination.
We just end up wasting massive reserves of energy waiting for external validation.
We wait for the people who hurt us to achieve self-awareness and change first before we feel permitted to move forward.
Which could literally take forever.
It usually does. And this is why the author notes that asserting personal agency in this way is actually a highly subversive stance.
Subversive,
It
yeah.
strips away the political ideology we usually attach to responsibility.
It's subversive because it violently cuts the cord of dependency. It completely removes your reliance on external actors.
You're just suddenly free.
Yeah, you realize you don't need your parents to finally issue that apology. You don't need the corporate system to become utopia overnight. You don't need your partner to magically see the light before you can make a strategic move.
You are no longer downstream of your own life, waiting to see what the current brings you.
You become the source.
The moment that profound acknowledgement lands, the realization of these were my actions, regardless of the historical forces that preceded them, you suddenly unlock access to real, tangible choice.
And we aren't talking about the theoretical choice of what should ideally happen in a perfectly fair world.
No, we are talking about the kind of pragmatic, boots-on-the-ground choice
Right.
that actually generates a measurably different tomorrow.
That shifts the landscape dramatically for an individual. But the deep dive pushes further, which I love, scaling this concept up into the relational field.
Yes, how we interact with others.
Because how does this shift in individual authorship break the gridlock in our relationships? The text makes a fascinating mathematical claim here.
It does. It states that if two people in a conflict both insist their behavior was solely caused by the other person, resolution isn't just difficult, it is mathematically impossible.
It is a structural impossibility.
Now, in systems theory, this dynamic is often referred to as mutual causality, or codependent homeostasis.
Okay, break that down first.
So if I tell you, I only raise my voice because you constantly ignore me, and you fire back, well, I only ignored you because you're constantly raising your voice.
Oh, I've had that exact argument.
We all have. But notice what happens. We have both expertly placed ourselves completely outside the loop of causation. We are both claiming to be merely the inevitable effects of the other person's cause.
Right.
And if a room only contains effects and zero causes, the system is entirely paralyzed. The conflict can escalate into a screaming match, it can exhaust itself into cold silence, but it fundamentally cannot resolve.
It immediately brings to mind the classic Mexican standoff trope in a Western movie.
Oh, that's perfect.
Right. Everyone has a weapon pointed at everyone else, and the dialogue is just an endless loop of, you lower yours first.
Nobody wants to be the one to drop their weapon.
Because they perceive themselves purely as a respondent to the threat of the other person.
And how do we typically view Stepping out of that standoff, we view it as a surrender.
Yes, a total defeat.
We think taking ownership means throwing your gun on the ground, making yourself entirely vulnerable, and just waiting to be shot.
Which is exactly the opposite of what the text is arguing. Taking authorship in this framework isn't about becoming a martyr.
No, not at all.
It's about realizing you have the agency to simply lower your weapon, turn around, and walk out of the saloon entirely. You literally change the physics of the room.
And by stepping out of the architecture of mutual blame, you strip the other person of their primary excuse.
Right.
It doesn't mean capitulation. It certainly doesn't mean accepting toxic or harmful behavior from a partner or colleague.
Definitely not.
It is simply stating, with absolute clarity, I will account for what I brought to this specific dynamic, and I will do it without using your bad behavior as a shield to avoid looking at my own.
It's adopting the stance of, I refuse to let the mess you are making blind me to the mess I am making.
That's a great way to put it.
Mm.
And if we telescope this concept out even further to the collective dimension, we see the exact same paralysis plaguing our macrostructures.
Oh, yeah. Entire societies, massive corporate institutions, nations.
They get trapped in these identical frames of mutual blame. We endlessly cycle through historical audits, naming who did what to whom over the centuries.
Which, to be clear, is important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The author insists that acknowledging historical harm possesses immense moral weight, and it's vital. But, and this is the key moral naming, is structurally distinct from actually transforming a system.
Because transformation asks a totally different set of questions.
It does.
It bypasses who caused this and asks, what can I do within the physical and social territory I actually inhabit today?
Right.
Yeah. What specific, measurable choices are available to me right now from the exact coordinates where I'm standing, regardless of the historical forces that built this frustrating territory?
Institutions remain paralyzed, precisely because every individual inside them is waiting for the totality to shift.
Waiting for the boss to change everything.
Exactly. They are waiting for sweeping systemic change to arrive from the top down before they alter their daily behavior. But the sociological research we're reviewing argues that pragmatic, localized action is the only true disruptor of a stagnant system.
It has to start small.
Complex systems only evolve when the individual nodes inside them, meaning that people begin functioning differently. And you can only function differently if you reclaim your specific, limited piece of authorship.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you go about your week?
It's a lot to take in.
It is. And if you're digesting this and feeling a wave of overwhelm, maybe a creeping fear that owning your actions means you are now obligated to take the blame for every terrible, complex dynamic in your life, we really need to pause and establish a critical boundary here.
This is so important.
We have to look at the final and perhaps most vital distinction the text makes. There is a massive, impenetrable wall between accountability and shame.
This is the exact spot where the concept usually derails for people.
Yeah.
There's a profound psychological difference between owning your actions and being consumed by them.
Yeah.
Accountability, under this functional framework, is not self-annihilation.
It's not beating yourself up.
Right. It does not demand that you take on all the collective harm in a situation as if you were the sole malicious architect of a toxic dynamic.
It's basically just objective data gathering.
Yes, exactly.
It's the ability to say, I see what I did, I see the mechanism of how it functioned, I see the result it created. It's almost scientific in its neutrality.
You're observing the landscape of your own life without the emotional distortion of guilt.
And it is incredibly liberating to realize that true accountability isn't a theatrical performance of remorse. You aren't required to put on a dramatic, tearful confession designed to show the other person how deeply you loathe yourself so they will finally grant you forgiveness.
Because a dramatic confession is ultimately just another manipulation tactic.
Oof, that's true.
It is. It is still a way of trying to manage and control someone else's emotional response. It remains entirely focused outward.
Right.
True accountability is significantly quieter. It is durable. It does not require the messy drama of emotional collapse to be genuine.
It's just facing facts.
And when you manage to strip away the exhausting defensiveness and the self-flagellation, something remarkable occurs in the brain. You gain access to high-quality information that people who are stuck in the blame loop can never touch.
Because they're spending 100% of their cognitive bandwidth defending their victim narrative.
Exactly. They are entirely consumed by the preservation of their story. When you step out of that and look at cause and effect objectively, you can finally map out interventions, for your own behavioral patterns.
You start making strategic decisions based on the reality of the terrain.
Right, rather than basing your decisions on the intricate, exhausting story of why you shouldn't have to navigate this terrain in the first place.
It is the difference between trying to navigate a sprawling, chaotic city using a beautifully drawn map of how the urban planner should have built the roads 50 years ago.
Which is useless.
Totally useless. Versus using a slightly ugly, pragmatic map of where the potholes in the actual roads are today. Only one of those maps is going to actually get you home.
That's a brilliant way to look at it.
So, to synthesize this journey we've been on today, and it's been a deep one, we have seen how our most unsolvable chronic problems, whether they manifest as personal anxieties, completely gridlocked relationships, or massive institutional failures, they often persist because we are working on them at the incorrect level.
The wrong level entirely.
We pour all our vital energy into analyzing root causes, debating who bears the ultimate moral responsibility, and waiting for external conditions to miraculously align.
We inadvertently treat ourselves as passive victims of circumstance, rather than the primary agents of our own lives.
Right.
And while making the internal shifts to personal authorship does not magically solve deeply entrenched problems overnight, it accomplishes something far more foundational. It creates the necessary conditions under which those problems become soluble.
Soluble, I love that word.
It reintroduces an active, capable agent back into a landscape that previously only contained victims and perpetrators.
It opens up the expansive space of choice where there used to only be the suffocating weight of consequence. And at the very beginning of this deep dive, we talked about that visceral discomfort, that harsh, chilling feeling when someone says, your actions are your own.
The temperature drop.
Yes. But hopefully, after unpacking the mechanics of agency today, that doesn't feel like a harsh, unfeeling accusation anymore. Hopefully, it feels like someone quietly handing you back the keys to your own life.
That's the ultimate goal.
So I want to leave you with a final thought, a direct challenge inspired by the source text philosophy on the territory we inhabit.
Oh, this is good.
I want you to bring to mind a persistent, annoying, deeply exhausting conflict in your life right now. It could be a bureaucratic nightmare at work, a circular argument with a partner, or even just a frustrating, self-sabotaging pattern you have with yourself. Got it.
I'm picturing mine.
Okay, now ask yourself, where exactly are you waiting for the other person or the entire structural situation to change before you permit yourself to make a move? Where are you sitting in the flooded living room, passionately pointing your finger at the contractor?
Just waiting.
Right. And what happens if today you stop waiting for the totality to shift and just take absolute, unapologetic authorship of the 1 square foot you actually stand on?